This happened last year. I went on a hiking trip with my younger brother Chris. It was a warm summer weekend in September. The spot we had picked was pretty busy in the summer months, but it calmed down substantially in the fall. I had been there before, but Chris hadn't. He didn't have much outdoors experience, but I had more than a few challenging trips to show. We packed up our camping gear, loaded up the truck, and set off for an adventure. There was a car park and a small ranger station, with a gift shop at the entrance. There were a few other vehicles, so we figured there may be other hikers. The way it worked was that there were no assigned campsites. You just hike in and set up wherever you want. If a spot was empty, then that means it's available. We got started early in the afternoon and hiked for about 4 hours. We found our first spot. It was right next to a lake. There was plenty of space for our tent, and there was already a fire pit set up. We walked around for a bit, looking for firewood, but the area was really picked over. All we could find were a few twigs, hardly enough for a decent fire. That was fine, though. We thought it would be easier at the farther sites. We went to bed early that night. I lay awake for much of the night. We slept right on the ground to keep the weight of our packs down, and I was really uncomfortable. During the night, I heard some sounds. Most were deer, but I heard an animal that I'm pretty sure was a bear. It was pretty easy to tell the difference in sound. I knew that there were bears in the area, and we had taken the correct precautions. Our food was hoisted high in the tallest tree, so I wasn't worried. We didn't have anything in the tent. The next morning, we packed up and hit the trail early. We walked until around noon, when Chris spotted something unusual. A backpack lying abandoned on the ground, just off the trail, maybe 20 feet away. It was bright blue, so it was easy to see against the green grass. We cautiously approached it. As I examined it closer, our hearts skipped a beat. The backpack bore deep claw marks, unmistakably the work of a bear. We knew the dangers of being out there, and encountering a bear in its territory was a sobering reality. We were concerned that there was a bear attack. I bent down to take a closer look at the bag. I wanted to find something identifying about the owner. That way the rescue team could know who to look for. When I examined it closer, I saw that there was blood on the bag, and it was still wet. That was enough for us. We backed away from the bag and turned back in the opposite direction. Our vacation was over. There was an injured person out there, and a bear with a taste for human. We had to go. Chris was more upset than I was, but I was really scared too. We hiked out as fast as we could. It had taken us about 6 or 7 hours to get in, and it took us less than 5 hours to get out. The sun was setting as we reached the ranger station. Without hesitation, we reported our findings to the authorities. Search parties were sent out that night, but nothing was found. Days later, we received news. A fellow hiker known to have traveled the same trail had gone missing. The evidence pointed to a horrifying reality, that the bear had crossed paths with this unfortunate soul. The search parties scoured the area for the following days, combing through every inch of wilderness in hopes of locating the missing hiker. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, a sense of despair settled over everyone. The hiker was never found. This was very big news in my area, because animal attacks are extremely rare. I've never heard of another one since. I still enjoy the outdoors, but after this, Chris said he would never go with me again. He took it hard, and I don't blame him. This is a creepy and terrifying incident that happened to me and my friends a few summers back. It was me, Ryan, Tom, and Dennis. Ryan and Tom also brought their girlfriends, so there were 6 of us in total. Our destination was a remote area in a state park near where we lived. It was a campground of sorts, but very sparse. I had been there before, and I didn't see another single person the entire time. We took 2 cars and parked at the visitors' center. Then we embarked on a hike. Each of us had a large backpack with our own personal gear and some food. The trail wound through towering trees and meandering streams, painting a picturesque landscape. I hadn't been out of our town that year, so I was excited to get out. I almost forgot how much I enjoyed the outdoors. After about 2 hours of trekking, we stumbled upon a perfect campsite, a peaceful clearing surrounded by dense forest. The tree line around the site was like a wall. It was really hard to walk more than a few feet without getting stuck on something. It was the same site that I had used the last time I was there. I think it was the first decent site on the trail, and it was good enough for us. We set up our tents right away, even though it was only around 2 p.m. There was a lot of sunlight left. Once we were done, we explored the area. I knew there was a lake not far away, so we went swimming and had a few drinks. It was a great day. When the sun descended, we went back to our site and started a fire. Ryan brought dinner for the first day. It was hot dogs. Typical low effort from him. We cooked our hot dogs over the fire and told stories. Before we knew it, it was around 1 a.m. I was the first to call it a night, but everyone else soon followed. I had my own tent, a small 2-person backpacking tent. The 2 couples shared a tent, and Dennis also had his own. In the stillness of the night, I heard some sounds coming from the woods. It sounded like faint footsteps, but it wasn't an animal. I knew it was a person. I didn't worry though, because I thought it was just one of my friends going to the bathroom. Just when I was about to doze off to sleep, I heard a blood-curdling scream. I thought it was one of the girls at first, but on second thought, I recognized the voice. It was Ryan. I unzipped my tent and poked my head out into the darkness. What I saw next froze me in my tracks. A shadowy figure loomed over Ryan's tent. I knew the figure wasn't one of my friends, because he didn't look anything like them. It was a tall man, at least 6'5", with a long coat and long hair. I couldn't tell any more detail about him in the dark. I called out, hoping to scare off the intruder and protect my friends, but as the figure turned around to face me, I saw nothing but a tall silhouette, cloaked in darkness. One thing I did notice, though, was that he seemed to be holding a knife in his right hand. I think it was a knife anyway. The stranger began advancing towards me. Before I could do anything, a sudden bang erupted from the darkness. Dennis, ever the quick thinker, fired his gun into the air. In that moment of chaos, the figure retreated into the depths of the woods. We all sat there in shock, looking at each other confused. We didn't go back to bed. There was no use. We were too scared anyway. I reignited the fire, and we sat around talking about what happened. I thought it was a man, but Ryan said it was some kind of a demon. Dennis thought it was a werewolf-type creature. I saw him the best, though, and I'm pretty sure those guys were letting their minds play tricks on them. In the morning, I noticed a large slit in Ryan's tent. That guy had cut a big hole in it. I hadn't noticed it in the dark. We gathered our belongings and hiked back to civilization. We reported the incident to the park ranger, who informed us that similar encounters had been reported in the area. I sarcastically thanked him for the warning. He deserved worse. When I was about 10 years old, my family and I went on a camping trip together. We went to a state park that was a few hours' drive from our home. It wasn't particularly remote. I think it would have been tough to do a real camping trip with young kids. It was really more of a vacation in a tent. Our site even had car access, so take that for what you will. We left early in the morning, my mom, brother, and sister. My brother was a year older than me, and my sister was 2 years younger. The 3 of them shared a large tent, and I had one to myself. When we got there, I noticed that there was a group of guys at the site next to us. They were around college age, if I had to guess, so probably early 20s, and there were 4 of them. These men were loud, obnoxious, and seemed to have little regard for the peace and serenity of the campground. After we set up our tents, we went for a walk around the area. When we came back, the guys were sitting around drinking and talking loudly. They were swearing a lot, which I didn't mind. My mom didn't appreciate it, though. Throughout the night, they seemed angry. It was like they were fighting with each other. I couldn't tell what it was all about, and I didn't really care. It was hard to sleep, but eventually I managed to get a few hours of rest. When we woke up the next morning, the men were asleep. One of them was passed out around the fire, and we could see another with his boots sticking out of a tent. They were a real mess. My mom told me to stay away from them. She sensed there was something off about the group. I took her advice and tried to distance myself, even though I was curious. Then I noticed something troubling at their campsite. Sticking out of the wooden picnic table was a large hunting knife. There was not really any reason to have something like that, but I didn't worry. I actually thought it was cool. My mom was scared though. As the second night descended upon the campground, the unruly men's behavior escalated. Their voices grew louder, filled with anger and aggression. There was definitely some animosity between at least two of them. It was really uncomfortable to be around there. Then suddenly, I heard what sounded like a gunshot. I froze in shock as I tried to comprehend what had just happened. I felt it deep in my chest. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. Initially, I thought it might be firecrackers. However, the arrival of the park ranger quickly changed that notion. I know now that it was a gunshot. The ranger hurried to the scene. They engaged in a conversation with the intoxicated men. Their voices were stern. It soon became apparent that one of them had shot a firearm, endangering not only themselves, but everyone around. After that, my mom told me to stay still. I wanted to join my family in the main tent, but my mom wanted me to stay. We listened as the police arrived. I could see the flashing lights through the fabric of my tent. The men were drunk, as I could tell from their voices. But other than that, they seemed to cooperate with the police. They were taken away soon after. When we got up, the site next to us was cleared. Minutes later, the ranger drove by and told us that we had to leave. We didn't argue. We packed up our belongings and got out of there as fast as possible. Although it was a bad trip, we visited the same campground several times after that. Nothing like this ever happened again. I never found out what happened to those guys. I am sure the one who shot the gun got in trouble. Fortunately, nobody was hit, but it would have been illegal to even shoot at where we were, especially since they were drunk. My friend Wallace and I have a tradition of taking at least one camping trip per year. We're from LA, and we've gone to Arizona, Nevada, and more local places like Joshua Tree, and each time we've gone, it's been a positive experience. We come back home with a ton of new memories and inside jokes. So when I suggested to him that we take a weekend trip, Thursday night through Sunday, to Monument Valley, Utah, he agreed, and we were both stoked. On our first road trip we ever took, we went to the Grand Canyon. We were about to drive to Monument Valley, but then we got locked in by a blizzard, so it's been a location I've wanted to go to for quite some time. Thursday night rolled around, and we were ready to take off on a 10-hour excursion through the desert. My friend drove the first 4 or 5 hours, because I'd been up the previous night making preparations, and I had to work a 10-hour shift. We made it to Barstow, and decided to take a few detours. We heard of an old ghost town, close to where we thought we could get some good astrophotography shots. The road to the ghost town was pitch dark, and really bumpy. It was 1 a.m. at this point, and I was on high alert. You never really know what you'll find in the middle of the desert. As I was staring out my window, I saw an enormous 20-foot dark man-shaped mass coming up the road, and I nearly crapped myself. But as we got closer, we realized that it was just a giant sign in the shape of a gold miner promoting the ghost town. Crisis averted. We also found an abandoned water park a few miles away, but decided not to go, because we saw some flashlights out in the distance. We hit the road again, and passed through Vegas at around 3:30 in the morning. We never realized how empty and dead it feels in the wee hours of the morning. I started driving from here, and the rest of the trip until our destination was pretty uneventful. We passed a town called Colorado City, where we spotted a ton of abandoned houses and complexes, and we said to ourselves that we should check those out. but we ultimately decided not to, due to time constraints. We later found out that this town is full of polygamous Mormons that are hostile towards outsiders. They live in unfinished houses to avoid being taxed by the government. We even saw some of them at a gas station about 20 miles away from their town, and they were all dressed in old 19th century clothing. They were staring at us and giving us dirty looks. After a long day of sightseeing and driving, we finally arrived at Monument Valley by around 8 p.m. Needless to say, we were exhausted. We set up camp and made dinner in the dark. We hadn't had a solid meal all day. We sat down to take some astrophotography shots. After a couple of drinks, and since we were on Native American land of the Navajo, I decided to tempt fate and ask my friend if he had ever heard of the Navajo folklore legend, the Wendigo. He said no, so I decided to tell him that the Wendigo is some sort of shape-shifting Navajo witch doctor that attacks animals and people. It can then shape-shift into said person or animal. He looked mystified, yet intrigued. So then how do you spot the Wendigo? Wallace asked. Then I said, the Navajo say that it will look vaguely like an animal, but it'll walk funny. It'll have similar features, but the definitive giveaway is that it has no tail. The Navajo are afraid of even mentioning the Wendigo, in fear that it'll call the cryptid on them. I then proceeded to tell him a few stories I read on Reddit, and some of the crazy things that some people have experienced. One of the stories I mentioned was of a Navajo man who was shooting guns near some ruins with his cousins. They started hearing weird animal noises. The story later mentions that he encountered a black dog with no tail that gritted its teeth at him. We both sat there silently in the arid 28-degree weather. A light breeze picked up, and we heard a dog barking off a couple miles away. We waited around as if waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever did. It's probably just some camper's dog, I assured my friend. Just then, I realized I had left my shutter button for my camera in the car. I told Wallace that I would be right back, and I would only take about 3 minutes. The car wasn't far away, but it was far enough to be out of earshot. As I was rummaging through my car, I thought I heard someone calling my name. I stopped and listened closer. Nothing. I'm probably just imagining things, I thought skeptically. But as soon as I found my device, I realized that somebody was calling my name. It was Wallace, and he sounded distressed. I shut the car and started running back to camp, thinking that he might have encountered some sort of rattlesnake or scorpion. But as soon as I got back, a black dog was standing right before us. We looked at each other as if expecting one of us to do something. That's when I noticed and pointed. Look, it has no tail. I picked up a hatchet, fully expecting for this thing to attack us, but it never did. It just wandered around and acted like your typical dog. We let out a sigh of relief. Dude, what happened after I left? I asked. I was just sitting here adjusting the settings on my camera, when out of the corner, I thought I'd seen a black mass moving in the shadows. Out of nowhere, I heard a strange lip-smacking sound coming from under me, sort of like when a dog licks its lips. I looked down, and there's this black dog staring back at me, and that's when I called your name, Wallace answered. We didn't know what to do, but seeing as the dog was acting as a dog would, we let it be. He ended up keeping us company the rest of the night and being really friendly with us. We appropriately named him Wendigo, as if we had not just learned a lesson not to tempt fate. We then decided to call it a night, and as we slipped into our tent, Wendigo went into one of the bushes and fell asleep there for the night. Nothing really happened the next day. We did see Wendigo again the next morning, wandering around different campsites with another dog. In the light of day, we realized his face was sort of strange looking, but all in all, he just looked like a wild dog. One more thing happened on Sunday morning, which I imagine is probably unrelated. We heard some coyotes howling and screeching, but other than that, it was pretty tame. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure if this is a Wendigo story, but at the very least, it's a strange yet interesting coincidence that we can tell our friends and family.